everybody. My name is Dale Kingsmill. I'm here to be your guide through our Patreon Q&A for this month, which is going to be a lore Q&A with one Matthew Colville. How you doing, Matthew Colville?
Oh, I'm doing great, Dale. Things are going really well. We released our game a little over a month ago. I think it's fair to say that it's a solid hit, and the reception to it has been extraordinarily positive, more than we could hope for. And there's a lot of people asking about the lore, and so I figured now is a good time to do a lore stream.
I feel like there were so many questions that were so specific. I feel like I need to catch up on what's what. Jerry, if we could get the map of the typescape, I am going to name
There's
each
no
region.
map of Orden, though, which is what you want. Actually, I think you might be able to see a little bit of it in the timescape map.
You can see it in the timescape. We're doing this. Tell us about Corsair.
Corsair is a desert land, and the closest analog is like pre-Islamic Arabia. High fantasy pre-Islamic Arabia. When I say pre-Islamic, I have to say that because I don't want people to draw the wrong conclusions. There are no real world religions in the timescape. I guess there are obvious and direct analogs. And it's Corsair is where the word Corsair comes from in Orden, in Kalian.
Not in the real world.
But in the world, the word Corsair comes from Corsairians because there were a couple of generations where they were known as being really effective pirates, sea pirates, obviously. And before Corsair was Corsair, it was the Thaumaturgy of Khartoum, and before that that was Kham. It's not one-to-one. Kham and Corsair are co-located. They're not literally the same place. The territories were different, and that's where the Beast Lords of Kham came from, which is where, and it's always been a magic rich place. And the people of Corsair worship demons, but not real demons from the abyss. It's just it's like jinn. Demons like a translation of a term from their work. And so when other people are like, you guys worship demons, they're like, well, sure. I mean, in your language, that would be a translation. It's like how jinn and genie are sort of quasi-related. They're very henotheistic, which is not entirely unlike the Hakan. They think that there's like a demon of the morning wind, right? There's a demon of they're spirits, and that everybody has one. They think that everybody is adopted by one, right? And somebody who is sufficiently religious, which is not everybody, from Corsair, can sort of look at you and get to know you and go, I know which demon adopted you. And it's just because I like drama, right? Why are they called demons? Well, because it causes other people to draw the wrong conclusions, right? And think that there's something evil about these people, but there isn't, right? But that drama is very useful for us as storytellers. The fact that these are just our gods, this is just our tradition, and they are not the demons from the abyss, right? It's just these words are imprecise, and there's a lot of translation happening. A lot of terms that are pejorative here in the real world, when they're applied like transnationally, the people that are a nation are like, whatever, we don't use that language, we don't care. Like that term doesn't offend us because it's not even our language, man. And that's kind of how the people of Corsair are about. They're like, call it whatever you want. You want to call them genies or jinn or demons? That's fine. We don't care.
Talrock wants to know, they just want to hear more about the Beast Lords of Kham. They want to know how long ago were they present in the world? How far reaching were they? What species are they responsible for creating other than Polder? Which I want to know more about because I didn't know that. And I just played a Polder in one of your games.
Polder don't know that.
Well, great. Then I was in character.
I mean, that's the thing that kind of blows my mind is that, like, imagine you're an average person. Imagine you picked a random point in the history of behaviorally modern humans and you asked a random person, where did humans come from? What kind of answer do you think you're going to get? Right? That's the kind of answers you get in Orden, because people don't, for most of human history, people didn't know about things like DNA and evolution and stuff like that. Polders, when you ask a Polder where they're from, they'd say, well, I was born down the street. You know, what do you mean? Where am I from? Right? And if you ask them, well, where's your species from? They would say, I don't know, probably a god made us or something. Right? That's just like humans here in the real world thought for a long time before Darwin came along and Lyell and guys like that. So yeah, most Polder do not know that they are a created species. In fact, there's a moment in my second novel where the main character and his nascent party, which includes a Polder, meet a Celestial, and the Celestial is pissed off and looks around and sees the Polder and says, this one is false. It is a made thing. And Hayden, the main character, looks at Ainsley, kind of like for the first time, and goes, yeah, actually, I think you're probably right. because uniquely because Hayden had been a campaigner for so Hayden's head is full of all kinds of crazy lore that adventurers learn, right? Adventurers, because they explore all ancient temples and they read all this crazy lore, right? But no one else has any idea what these people are talking about. What do you mean a made thing? My parents made me, right? But yeah, the polders were created by the beast lords of Kham. Kham was not an empire, it was just a city state. It had an area of control that it projected power across, but it was small. It was not big. It was small the way like the area around Athens. You should be thinking about it like that. And it predates the Khalid Empire. It's Kham existed for I think about 700 years, and it was pre-Kalian, and it is in the same place that Corsair is now mostly.
And did they make other species?
They made tons of species. Yeah, all kinds of stuff. That they had perfected what they called beast magics, which is being able to make, which they knew was possible. It must be thaumalogically possible because the elves did it. And so they spent a long time and figured out how to make species that would be able to self-perpetuate. They may be the origin of the ritual of Dracogenesis, but I'm not sure we know. I'm not sure we know who invented Dracogenesis. I think it's older. I think actually it's a lot older than Kham. I think it might go back to the Age of Wonders. But yeah, they invented a lot of creatures. They didn't invent a lot of intelligent species. So like basilisks and stuff like that might be Khamish. Fedros is a peninsula south of Rioja. There's like a mountain range, and if you go north from Fedros and you go right, then you end up in Rioja. If you go left, you end up in Corsair. It's easily defended. It's traditionally been a really militaristic society, but it's our Hellenic Greece / Roman analog. They have a unique form of government that they keep secret and they don't tell other people about. And when people say, how do you, there's a quote from something I wrote somewhere where someone's like, I heard you guys gave up like kings and queens and stuff like that and came up with something new. And they're like, yeah. And they go, what is that new system? And the Phaedron just smiles and says, trial and error. I don't know why they keep it secret, or I don't know why they think they decided to keep it secret, but it's democracy. They're a fledgling democracy. And in fact, there's a chance, depending on how the storyline goes, that's going to happen to Kamara, because the pharaoh of Kamar, who's like 17, I think ends up being spirited away to Phaedros and is going to be raised there. And he's going to be, this is a better way. This is a better way. I was taught that the pharaoh was god and king. It's unique among the places in Orden that it's a monotheistic culture, and the pharaoh is the god king. But the new boy who's been trying to enact the Amarna heresy gets conquered. They get conquered. They get conquered by Ajax, and the shadow on the surface of the sun spirit him out and save him. And he decamps to Phaedros and grows up there. The question is, can he live long enough to enact change in a post-Ajax world? Phaedrons all take philosophy very seriously, and so they have the same kind of tribalism everybody else has. It's just their tribalism is about, are you a stoic or a cynic or this, that, and the other things. They're like sports teams to the Phaedrons. There's like a 700-year period where you got city-states. City-states are awesome. This is the way. This is the best way to organize a society, and that period of ancient Greece is what Phaedros is about.
Rioja.
The most important thing about Rioja is kind of a Mediterranean kind of like, as far I'm talking about the climate, wherever you would get olives, that kind of terrain, that's Rioja. It is also where Capital is. Capital is sort of the biggest city in Orden and always has been.
The greatest city in this or any age.
Yeah. It's larger now than it's ever been. I think like 2 million people live there, which is the largest population of any city anywhere in the timescape. What is the most true thing about Rioja? That's where Capital is. But Rioja is a feudal, post-feudal. It's sort of like you're getting into a lot of mercantilism when you get to Rioja. But people there still live in a relatively low-tech way, and they sort of resent Capital as sucking all the oxygen out of the air when it comes to, it's this huge, it's as big a region as like, the area around the Med or whatever, or like it's closer to like Italy, Spain. It's big. There's a lot of people live there. It's not all about Capital. But the thing that everybody talks about is Capital. So when you hear me talking about like the gods and culture of Capital, those are the gods and culture of Rioja. It's just that Capital is like really extra. It's kind of like the difference between any place's urban area and the exurbs, the places that are the rural area. In Orden, no one's really talking about what the people of Rioja are doing. When they talk about Rioja, they mean Capital. And Capital is very high tech. They've got black powder. They've got things like compasses and printing. They've got the printing press. They've got movable type. Although many of these things are under tight guild control. So that's the most interesting thing about Rioa is that's where capital is.
Brian Moriarty wants to know how much does the average person in each region know about the other regions? Like, they know that it's probably different depending on the place. Like in Capital, they probably know more about Vas Lauria than maybe certain parts of Vas Lauria know about Capital. But what's that sort of dissemination of information like?
I mean, it all depends on whether or not you're living in a city or out in the farmlands. My grandfather was the first person in his family to go to college, probably ever. Meaning, like, you go back far enough, and most of my people are peasants, and they're peasants and then laborers for literally thousands of years. There are a lot of people in Vanagar, I don't know how many this is true of, who don't even know there is a rest of the world. They think this is it. They live and die here in Vanagar. They don't have easy access to these other societies. That's one of the reasons Vanagar and Ix have never been conquered. There's a couple of reasons. A, they're far away and hard to get to. So who cares? Like, no one's giving a shit. But also, they're far away and hard to get to. It's a pain in the ass. And so it's easy to live on Ix and just not know any of these other, like, what would be the benefit of knowing? These people don't have radio. They don't have maps. They are born and they live and die. And unless they need to go on a religious pilgrimage, which is probably not going to take them to another region, unless they need to go on a religious pilgrimage, which they'll do a couple times in their lives, right? So they'll go see the big city. They'll go see the big city and they'll have opinions about it because they're expected to go to the Cathedral of St. Llewellyn, for instance. But apart from doing that a couple of times in their lives, for them, the huge cultural difference is the difference between being a farmer and the city. That's to them the big deal. Most people live on farms or make a living off the land or are nomads or whatever, and they have no awareness of other regions. They might have heard of them, maybe they've got a book, like the equivalent of a farmer's almanac. But most people are not non-literate or pre-literate. Most people in Orden are not nobles, are not rich. They don't live in cities, and they can read and write enough so that when there's a proclamation, they can kind of figure it out. And that's about it. The difference is any sufficiently large city probably has a lot of ships, and people who are on ships know about all these places. But what they know about is the cities, right? If you're a sailor and you're a pirate or a tradesperson, whatever, if you've got a boat and you go from city to city, what you know are the cities. You have no idea what's going on in the rest of Vas Lauria, but you know what goes on in Black Bottom. You know Black Bottom like the back of your hand. You have opinions about Black Bottom, and you have all your opinions about Vas Lauria come from Black Bottom. But you've never been to any of these other places, and you've never even seen them.
Ix.
Ix is a big island chain south of the Bale Sea. It's south of western Vas Lauria. And because of weather patterns, it's just really hard to get to. Like boats, currents go around it. They tend not to go to it. And it's very heavily jungled. There's it's kind of like Hawaii where there's one big island and it is called Ix, but there are also all these other little islands, and that whole island chain is called Ix. It's one of those things where the people reading the maps are probably speaking Kalian and they see IX and they go, Ix, I get it. But the people who were dictating were saying Ish, and they were like, well, Ish, how do you write that? It's not exactly ISH. It's a different syllable, so they used an X. And so we are mispronouncing it when we call it Ix, but almost everybody in Orden mispronounces it. And the people that live there, I think they live mostly in the treetops. They do have buildings, and their buildings are pretty high tech. In terms of, I don't mean high tech as in like electricity. I mean like if you could see the capital city, you'd be like, holy crap, these people built that? They're lore-wise, but they mostly stayed in the trees. Their civilization, with a couple of capital city exceptions, which is huge stone buildings, their civilization mostly is in the trees. And that's because of the terror lizards that live on the ground, which are fantasy dinosaurs. And those things don't screw around. The dominant species there used to be snake people. But the last king of the snake people sort of went mad and sacrificed a bunch of his people and made the gods angry. And so they cursed the snake people. I don't know what the three things were. They would no longer write. They would no longer do this other thing. No more would they smelt metal. And the gods decided to de-civilize these people because it's like, you abused the privilege. And that allowed the humans to kind of rise up and take over. And there's something about the flora of Ix where if you eat the food there long enough, and it takes decades, it might actually take generations, you gain telepathy.
Oh.
So the Ixians are native telepaths.
Benoni, how did the ancient cultures of Orden treat talents? Presuming that they aren't new and that they knew about talents, what did ancient cultures think about them?
Well, ancient cultures in Orden are not necessarily more primitive than modern cultures in Orden. In fact, I think it's demonstrably the opposite. I think the first human empire and the second human empire were both a lot more quote unquote advanced and would have understood what was going on with the talent a lot better than people in Orden than anybody in Orden do now. So I think it depends on where and in what time you were born. Everything's, but there are people who thought, there have been cultures that thought that the talents were like the chosen of God. They were blessed. They were blessed because they have an innate ability, right? And there are others, including a lot of modern cultures, that treat them like mutants in the X-Men, a thing to be afraid of. I would say, generally speaking, most power structures in history have been at best wary of talents, because being a talent is a way to gain enormous world power in an unregulated fashion. And whoever holds the real political power around here is going to consider that a threat. That is a pretty routine, it's a theme that comes up over and over again in history.
Tell us a little bit about Vanagar.
Jordy, when he started working here, Jordy has known me for 30 years. And he has played several times in my setting. He has run D&D in this setting. And when he started working here and started looking at all the documents, he went, hey, you named all the regions, because they didn't used to have names. It used to be the Uttermost North, the Infinite Desert. I like those names. They were evocative, but they're hard to copyright. So Vanagar is the Uttermost North. It's a giant bay. So it's a huge, the whole civilization, it lives along this giant bay, the south border of which is the Great Forest, the Great Woad. And the Great Woad is like a continent unto itself. It's so huge. The only people who can reliably get from someplace like Vas Lauria into Vanagar are the Hawk Lords. You can't just hoof it and get through the Woad, but not a lot of people bother to do that. The people of Vanagar are like the Old Norse. They have a lot of the same traditions. They have their own gods. There is another civilized group up there. I think there are Gol up there. So you get the Gol up in Vanagar. There's a thing called the Enclave up there. And the Enclave, I think, are what happened to the Thaumaturgy of Khartoum when they were overthrown. They decamped. The Enclave are like a magic-based society, right, where they're just a bunch of wizards. And the people of Vanagar do not like them. But they're really small. It's like there's not that many members of the Enclave. It's like one city, basically, and they keep to themselves. And so there's this general conflict between them. But otherwise, there's the tribes. I think they're the 9 tribes or the 10 tribes, or the 10 clans, and you belong to a clan.
You've already mentioned the Great Woad. Benjamin Appel wants to know, are there woads outside of Vas Lauria? Is there a woad in Ix, perhaps?
Oh, I don't think so, no.
Not in Ix.
I mean, there is technically a woad in Vanagar in the sense that Vanagar is bordered by one, but there are woads in Higara. There are woads wherever you get a lot of forest, and there's Ix is jungle. It's not really forest.
So it can't just be any tree. It has to be.
Correct. It's not. So the desert areas don't have woads. They might have had woads in the past, but they don't now. In fact, that whole area, like that whole central area, used to just be one solid woad. And then, so every other biome, apart from Ix and Vanagar, every other biome that happened after the woads started dying. And it's just that Vas Lauria is the most heavily forest area, so it's got the most woads.
Does the island, continent, whatever it's called, that Rioja and Fedros and everything are on, does it have a name?
Yes.
Are you going to tell me what it is?
No.
Oh, okay. Do they have woads? Probably, maybe?
Fedros has woads. Fedros absolutely has woads. I think it's kind of thick. It's thick with them, because that's where you get all of their legends. They're not legends, they're history of like satyrs and stuff like that.
Ooh,
centaurs, all that Greek shit that is satyrs and centaurs and stuff that comes from the Phaedron woads.
Lewis Tinley asks, in other D20 fantasy games, players have the option to select half ancestries, for example, half elves, half orcs.
Yeah.
But that's not how you've done it in Draw Steel, and you've talked about this in the past. But what motivated that decision, and was it based on the setting's lore design considerations or something else?
Oh, I'm glad you asked this. How is it, and why is it like that? How is that you can be a half elf in Orden? There might be like one in all of Orden, because the way you get half elves is a human and an elf fall in love, and they petition the gods for a miracle that will allow them to procreate, because they are not the same species and they can't do that normally. And it takes a miracle. There's no spell, there's no ritual powerful enough. It takes a miracle. It takes the gods blessing your union, right? And you could have any two species under, if it takes a miracle, A miracle can do anything. So you can have any two species that are where the members are sapient and willing and consenting can do that. And the reason it works that way is because that's how it works in the Lord of the Rings. And I'm a big fan of Tolkien as a writer and a world builder. And I've read way more about how that dude thinks about writing and world building than I actually have like his actual fiction. And there's actually a point like somebody wrote to him and said, "Does this make sense? How can these species even interbreed?" And he goes, "Yeah, it doesn't really make sense." I'm paraphrasing. He's like, "If I were a better writer, these would be alien species and they wouldn't be able to procreate at all." But then he goes, "But then I'd be a science fiction writer and I don't want to do that." And I was like, "Wow, look at that. Look nice." And so he thought a lot about it. So when you talk about we talk about like Elrond the half elven, somebody like Gary Gygax, who wasn't really paying attention because he didn't really like Tolkien, he assumes that that's just these two species had sex and this happened. But that's not what Tolkien thought. Tolkien was like, nope, Elrond is a descendant of Elrohir or whatever the dude's name is. There's like 3 different instances in the Silmarillion where a human and an elf fall in love, and they are called the Parathel, I think is what they're called. And their descendants get to choose, do you want to be an elf or a human? And that's what half-elven meant to him. That's what half-elven meant to him. It didn't mean you were you're like Spock. Like Spock canonically literally has human and Vulcan enzymes inside him, right? Like his blood is not, he can't donate blood to Vulcans or humans because his blood has got both, right? He'd have to donate twice as much in order to, right? And they talk about that in one of the episodes. It's not like that. It's like Elrond decided, nope, I'm an elf. Right. And him being half elven it's a way of saying, oh, you're descended from these people, but you decide. And that's how it works. And a lot of my world building is just sitting there looking at either D&D tropes or fantasy tropes or literally the Lord of the Rings and trying to come up with like, okay, but how would it be if we put a little bit more thought into it? And so that's why there are things like Celestials and Elves, because what I wanted people like Legolas. And I wanted people like Glorfindel. That dude took on like an army of Balrogs in the Silmarillion. That is not like, there's no point where Legolas will be able to do that. I know people reading The Lord of the Rings don't give a shit about this, but I know that Legolas is a hobbit elf. And the Hobbit is not set in Middle Earth. It is set in basically Albion. It's set in mythic England, right? But Glorfindel is literally, he's a Silmarillion elf. So you've got these like almost levels. You've got Hobbit elves, you've got Lord of the Rings elves, and you have Silmarillion elves. And I'm like, all right, let's unpack this and see if we can't come up with some kind of background that wraps it all up in setting reason for these things rather than just, well, when I wrote The Hobbit, I didn't know it was set in Middle Earth. Okay, all right, fair enough, but I'm starting from scratch, so that's why we have Celestials, who are like Glorfindel elves. Hello, I'm one dude who can take on an army of Balrogs. And then you have High Elves and Woad Elves, and that's how you get guys like Legolas.
Vas Lauria.
It's a bunch of nations. Well, actually, they're not nations yet. I guess that's important, is that they're not going to be nations for another like 1,300 years. We haven't had the Council of Aberdondon yet, so right now it's a place that has a bunch of regions. Right. And so when people talk about Andrim is not a nation. It doesn't have a government. It doesn't have any infrastructure. There never has been a king of Andrim. It's like the Dardanelles. Nations are a relatively new thing in human civilization. It's only a couple hundred years that we've had proper nations. But before that, there were regions like Gaul, Gaul. And everybody knew what you meant when you talk about Gaul, even though it didn't have specific borders. Same thing. Everybody knows what you mean when you talk about Andrim and Corwell and Grade and Farnham and Tull and Roll and places like that. But these are just areas. They're just areas. They aren't fixed. They don't have fixed borders or anything like that. The people who live there do have different cultural identities, but they don't necessarily map one to one. It's a mistake to imagine that therefore there must be somewhere in Vas Lauria, there must be France. No, it's not exactly like that. There's no checklist. There's no requirement on the part of Orden to have a mirror of everything on Earth. It's idiosyncratic. As you go from west to east, you start to get a lot more mountainous territory and a lot smaller polities. So a place like Roll, which will eventually become a country, or Sarda, they're small, but also the terrain is just a lot harder to get around it. It's probably one of the lower tech places, just because it's so goddamn big. And things they take a long time to propagate. There's still big chunks of Vas Lauria where they don't have the stirrup yet, but some places do. They don't have spurs. Some places do. They don't have clocks. They know they exist. They know clocks exist, but they're expensive and they can't maintain them, and not a lot of people can afford them. And so I describe Vas Lauria as it's the land of knights and wizards. And if you're thinking about like Robin Hood or Arthuriana, that's the place you're going to find that stuff.
Jerry, if we could grab that map of Vas Lauria. Corey, Nola, and Christian both have been asking about these towers that sort of are dotted across the map. Any info you can give about those, I think, would be really interesting.
At the Tower of the Oracle, that's the tower that people have fought over a lot. The Oracle made a guest appearance in the opening episode of the Chain of Acheron. So towers, they're wizard towers. They're ancient. They've been around for a long time. And they are, there's no one explanation that accounts for all of them. It might be all towers on this map are a focus for some type of energy. Oh, I said this in the Discord, in the Timescape channel, and a bunch of people went, oh, and I was like, okay, thank God I said that. There is no grand unified theory of magic in Orden. And it is a mistake to imagine that there is. Talents are doing something different than elementalists are doing. Shadows, the College of Black Ash, shadow magic is something completely unrelated to either of those things. There are imagers, there are warlocks, there's all sorts of shit, and they're all doing different things. There are dozens of ways to break the rules of reality. So a tower tends to be like an oil well that is planted over some natural source. This is not always true, but usually true. Some natural source of abundant supernatural energy. And you cap it with one of these towers, and the tower ends up absorbing it. Imagine if you built an oil well and over time, the actual physical structure started to be made of oil, like not metal anymore, right? Over time, if you live in one of these places and inhabit it, you gain the power of the tower. So whoever holds the tower becomes the Oracle over time. And you can go to the Tower of the Oracle and you can petition the Oracle and get a vision, and good luck trying to interpret it. And the Oracle can leave the tower and come back, but you can take that tower, you can siege it, you can kick the old Oracle out and install a new one, given sufficient time and the right person with the right knowledge. But the reverse is sort of also true. You could just build a tower and do a kind of magic there long enough, and you will infuse that tower with that energy over time. It's sort of like, you could take just a normal piece of non-magnetized iron and take a magnet and go zoom, 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 and over time you will turn that thing into a magnet. Same thing. You can sort of synthesize this effect through decades or generations of wizardly labor. And so that's what they are. That's what the towers are. They're ancient. Many of them are naturally occurring, and they are part of a network that wizards tend to manage. The owners of each tower kind of all know each other, and they're kind of part of the same clique, even though they might not all be doing the same kind of magic. Yeah, the tower translation, by the way, translation in Orden in this context means teleportation. They don't call it teleportation, they call it translation.
I just got really excited. I'm glad people asked about those towers, because when I was looking at the map, that was what I was like, I want to go to there, and I want to go to there, and I want to go to there. It was one of those it's a feeling I haven't had in a long time looking at TTRPG stuff.
Makes me happy. Well, honestly, Dale, that's the reason I made that map. Is because I wanted to put the kind of shit on it that inspired us when we were kids to be like, what's that? Can I go there? What's that thing? That looks cool. And so, yeah, I'm glad at least a little bit of it worked on you.
Kamara.
The Infinite Desert. It's high fantasy Egypt, ruled by a pharaoh who currently, currently he's in exile because Ajax conquered that place. Kamara, Fedros, Rioa, Corsair, Higara all have something in common, and that is they're relatively small and they have capitals. Right? Vas Lauria is not like that. Vas Lauria is too big. It's too big to have a capital. I think I talk about this actually in the monster book. If you're a player and you haven't read the monster book, there's like at least one big chunk of lore in there that will explain a lot of this. Vas Lauria, you can't really conquer Vas Lauria because it doesn't have a king. That's not how Ajax did it. But Kamara has a pharaoh and has a capital city, and that means you nuke that place and you are basically in charge now. And that's what he did. That's what Ajax did, and then he moved on. And the pharaoh put up a good fight, but the pharaoh was unable to hold Ajax off. So far, only the Empress of Higara has managed to hold Ajax off for various reasons. So it's a big, vast desert. There's probably some unique species that live there that we haven't met yet. They have like sand tech. They have like sand skimmers. They basically have like land speeders, right? They have like ships that surf the sand. That's where the shadow of the surface of the sun are from. They're the pharaoh's Delta Force. They're sort of like a combination of Delta Force and MI6. And they call themselves Shadows, Shadow 1, Shadow 2. And they're the world's premier counterintelligence team.
Higara, the last of Orden.
High fantasy Japan, ruled by an empress who I think the peasant think is immortal. She's not immortal. They just is a combination of inheritance and selection, which is, by the way, true every time there's ever a monarchy. I think the way monarchies actually worked in the real world is very different than the way people who only read fantasy think they work. In that there's often something equivalent to an election that happens when it's time to find out who the heir is, because there's no such thing actually as absolute power. And so you can have an heir, but if all the people that have power in your kingdom are like, not that person, nope, pick somebody else, right? Then all of a sudden there's all this pressure. And so via a process of normal everyday inheritance, but also enormous political pressure, there's this sense of continuity. I think I stole this from somewhere, where the empress is eternal. That's not true. That's not true. She's a normal person, but all this work is done to convince the proletariat that the empress is eternal, where in fact she's just a normal woman with politics and anything like that.
Michael Fox, in previous videos you've mentioned that the Kalian Empire is only the most recent world-spanning civilization, but there are 3 or 4 older civilizations. What do you know about them?
There's 2 earlier human civilizations. Like the Kalian Empire collapsed, I think, 1,300 years ago, and that collapse took a long time. So it had been in decline for a while before that, and its primacy, I think, lasts like 3,000 years. And then there's a long periods of no empires. And then there's the previous empire before that was a Chinese analog, the name of which I don't remember. It's written down somewhere. And then there's an earlier empire, which is the first human empire, which was, I believe, during the Age of Wonder, was very much like fantasy early India. And these are cultures I picked, not arbitrarily, but because I'm interested in them and because I wanted to find symbology that if I put in front of my players, they would recognize, because I'm not a graphic designer or an artist. I can't invent entirely new visual languages off the top of my head. But I wanted to be able to show my players stuff that they would go, that is from a different culture than the one that we're used to around here. And it's real old. And so I liked using the images and symbology from ancient China and ancient India because it produced that effect. My players and our audience is almost all, not exclusively, Americans. And so it's important that we come up with stuff that people look at and they go, oh, I get it. That's really old and from far away. Yep. I think it's the Garanja. I don't remember how to spell it. The first human empire was incredibly frisky magically. That was a high magic empire. Like they had extraordinary access to magic that no one has had since then. And so they invented all kinds of shit. There's all kinds of like crazy inventions and magic items hidden away in ancient temples and stuff that have been ruins for tens of thousands of years. Anyway, yeah. So there's only 2 previous human empires. 3 if you include the Kalians, but the Kalian is the most recent one. Ajax is trying to start a new one. He is patterning it very closely after the Kalian Empire. He's sort of trying to recreate the Kalian Empire, but not because he misses it, just because he thinks it would be a cool thing to do. It's kind of hard to describe. It's because he's a Phaedron, so his world conquest is always going to be Kalian.
I didn't know that Ajax was Phaedron.
He is. He's from Phaedros. And Phaedros is where the Kalian Empire came from.
Maybe they should have kept the democracy thing a little less secret, and maybe Ajax could calm down.
I don't think it's. I don't think it's. I think we may find out that one of the reasons that he decided to commit his life to conquest, which is not considered to be an explicit evil for most people of his stature in the world. It was a reaction to how distasteful he finds the idea of democracy.
He chose his philosophy. Brian Moriarty, Christian Lang, Brandon West, among others. Everybody wants to know about the Hawk Lords. What's their deal? Where are they from? Who are they?
I actually think the Hawk Lords are on their way toward differentiating as a species. I think that like in 20 or 30,000 years, they might not be able to interbreed with humans anymore. And in fact, it's possible that the Hawk Lords are an offshoot of the Goal. This tells you how little I know about them. But they are humans that live above the cloud line, and they are adapting to that so that they can breathe in low oxygen environments. When I think of the Hawk Lords, I think of a bunch of different things. It's a mashup, but one of them are the Dragon Riders of Pern. And they live in essentially I would say Bronze Age societies, like the Dragon Riders of Pern. Also the Fremen. They live in effectively sieges, right? The Fremen don't have cities. They have places that they I think the Fremen are intended to be like nomadic, but a siege is like a place that we live at in times of danger, right? And they're caves. They're all caves. So all these Hawk Lord weirs are all caves in the sides of mountains, and they're all above the cloud line. And they're the masters of the air. They don't have high tech, although they do have like chainmail. I think they might trade for it a lot. I think a lot of their outfits tend to be like, even their outfits tend to be mashups. A lot of furs to keep them warm, although they don't need. They're inured against the cold of the high atmosphere in a way that other humans aren't. But they still like wear furs, and they'll have like bits of breastplate and chainmail kind of on them because they've traded for these things. And the ones in Vas Lauria got beat by Ajax, and Ajax was like, "Join me, or I'm going to exterminate all of you." And they were like, "All right, well." Sounds like a deal. And just like everybody else who makes a deal with Ajax, they didn't enjoy doing it. And it's up to you, the players, to convince them to do something about it and come over to the good guy side. And I think they probably bond with their giant hawks much the same way that the people in Pern bond with their dragons. So there's like it's not literally telepathy, but it is like an imprinting happens. It's an emotional connection, right? Even it's not just like I know when my cat's pissed off. No, it's like an actual supernatural connection, but all that is communicated is emotional state.
The upper worlds.
Technically, the upper worlds are any worlds with a higher energy state than Orden. So that includes Quintessence, even though if you went to Quintessence, it would probably look like an Arab bazaar from the Tales of the Arabian Nights. Quintessence is the plane of all elements. Its capital is the city of Alloy, also known as the city of Brass. And it is one of the most multicultural places in the timescape. It's probably more multicultural than Capital. Capital is still human dominant, but there's basically every species you could meet anywhere in the timescape you could find in Alloy. The rest of the place is kind of like is wildlands because the elements are very abundant and frisky in Quintessence, and shit just gets spontaneously created and destroyed all the time there. And Alloy was ruled by the Queen of Fire, the Lady of Brass, who was one of the recent patrons of the Chain of Acheron. But she was an adventurer. She was like Robin Hood, and she liked having a mercenary company, and they went off on adventures. And as a result, she was overthrown. I think a fire dwarf named Zorn overthrew her and took over. And I remember it was literally Anna's character, Judge, tried to warn her that this guy, her general, was going to overthrow her in her absence. And she accused Judge of being disloyal, and Judge was right, and that just made her even more angry. She hates it when people are right that aren't her. If you want to know more about Alloy, I would go look up the Court of All Elements. In either Strongholds, I think it's Strongholds and Followers, has the Court of All Elements. And those are kind of the incredibly high-level cops of Alloy.
Was the Lady of Brass the one who crashed a pyramid into the...
No, the pyramid was not hers. She has a flying castle. It's not the flying pyramid is an ancient human structure that humans in the Age of Wonder made back when humans had access to the same kind of magic that Celestials can just do because they're demigods. The Iron Tower of Dis, which is one of the Helltrooper companies, which is also were players in my D&D game at Pandemic Studios back in the day, lifted this tower up and we're going to go take Ajax on, but Ajax got there ahead of them and outsmarted them. The Lady of Brass had her own flying castle, and when she fought Ajax, she had to retreat. He didn't really defeat her. He just fended her off, and she landed in what was the barony of Ol, O-L-L. And because her castle is technically part of Quintessence, like it carries this other dimension with it, when it landed, it changed all of the terrain to literal ruby dust. So the Ruby Desert, and somewhat literal. Arcadia is a world that the god of the elves created when he was fed up with Orden. Val was not one of the authors of Orden. That was these are 4 other gods. But Val liked it, and Val was like, this thing's cool. And I think it's neat. I think dragons are cool. I think I could do better. And he invented the Celestials, which normal people call elves because they don't know any better. Elf is a term that normal people in Orden apply to a vast category of things that includes Celestials, actual elves, and fairies. These are 3 completely different phenomenon, but normal primitive screwheads, normal farmers and peasants call them all elves. And they get confused when the term comes up. But the proper term for the thing Val created are the Celestials. And they're basically elf demigods. And Val was pretty happy with that. And almost the entire world was woed. And he was like, yeah, this is pretty cool. And then a bunch of stuff happened. The dwarves showed up and imposed the law of time. Val didn't like that, but he was willing to put up with it. Then the humans showed up, and humans invented war. And that was the point at which Val was like, if we can't unfuck this, what's the point? Right? And there was sort of an effort made to unfuck it, but no one wanted to go all the way because it would have meant exterminating all the humans. And so Val's like, I don't need this world. I'm a real god. And he made his own. He made his own universe or his own world, I should say, called Arcadia. And so Arcadia is basically like what Orden would have been like if Val had his way. And all the Celestials were like, we're going with you. And so they all went and joined their god, and that's why there are no more, there are still a few Celestials in Orden. They all live up there. And basically, Arcadia is elf land. It's all elf things are there. Fairies are there. There are high elves. There are all the different elves and things are all there. It's just a whole bunch of them were left behind, and they kind of feel differently about that.
We do have a question from Elliot Canada in chat saying, do other speaking peoples have equivalents of Arcadia? Were there any other gods who went off and made their own worlds?
Oh, there may be. I mean, anybody with sufficient power, like a god, could make a manifold. But there are micro manifolds all over the place. I mean, there are species that everybody thinks are extinct, but probably aren't extinct because they just left Orden and went to the timescape. But they didn't create their own world. They just used ships and rituals to just like anybody else does.
Alrighty.
So you occasionally read stuff about how these people are gone. There's no more of these guys. Well, there probably are actually. They're just, you have to get sufficiently high up in the timescape and you'll meet some of them. They're probably like colonies of them out there somewhere.
Isaiah M wants to know, how would you describe the difference between the elves of Orden to the elves and natives of Arcadia? What would an elf from Arcadia feel about the material plane?
For elves in Orden, Arcadia is like heaven. It's a place where if they're good, they'll get to go. I think you read the fiction I wrote.
The Golden Knight.
Yeah, the Golden Knight, who it's revealed to be an alternate universe version of Anna's character, Orin. And she says, like, she's dying. And nothing can be done to stop it. She has a mortal wound. And one of the last things that she says before she dies is, I long to see Arcadia. And the person she's talking to is her enemy. But it doesn't even occur to, because her enemy is also an elf. It doesn't even occur to this person that Orin might not make it to Arcadia, right? That this is obviously a storied elf hero, and Val likes that. Val likes people who, when they die, that was a good story, and that means you get to join him in Arcadia. Not everybody does, and it's not even really good behavior. So the analogy to heaven is imprecise. It's more just you lived a legendary life. Congratulations, you can come live with Val, and they come back sometimes. Like high elves, especially high elves, but not uniquely high elves, can tell when a child is born that this is a reincarnated elf who's come back from Arcadia. And they have rituals where they try to get that elf to remember their past. They call them the fated. What determines why somebody gets sent back? Is it Val chooses them, or do they choose themselves? Or does nobody choose them and it's events necessitated? Axiom is the plane of outermost law. That's where the Memenek are from. That's also where Unisol's headquarters are.
What is Unisol?
It's the Universal Solar League. What do you mean, what is it? Unisol is the Universal Solar League, and it's sort of the Timescape's version of the Federation. The propaganda that we've seen about the Federation, called Star Trek, paints them as the good guys. Well, how would you feel if you were one of these worlds that the Federation was kind of... But what they do is, Unisol is a trade organization. They're very, very similar to House of Verona's Navy in Capital. They protect trade among the different worlds of the very upper Timescape. And the issue is that when you arrogate to yourself the role of protecting trade, you're also picking winners and losers. You're saying this planet gets access to the space lanes, this one doesn't. So it's sort of like NATO. Who gets to join NATO? People don't get to join, they feel a way about it. Unisol is just an organization. I don't even think they're the government of Axiom. They're not. Memeneks have their own cultures and their own various governments. Unisol is just this big organization that is run by Memenek. Primordius is one of the worlds that they have an embargo against. It's the Sea of Eternal Change. It's the world of uttermost chaos. And there's like not continents on Primordius, there's islands, and they move. It's always changing. The native denizens are called the Proteans, and they are native shapeshifters, but not shapeshifters like a changeling. They can't assume any form. They can just like change their hand into a big club if they wanted to and stuff like that. They're very limited in how they can change form.
Patrick Woodcock says Orden is the prime manifold, but the stars in the sky are all other worlds. Is there something about Orden that makes it more primary than the other manifolds?
It's just like this. It's just like you got two scales. You have two scales, right? And on one side you have law, and on the other side you have chaos. Everywhere else in the timescape, the scales are not even. Orden is the only place where they're exactly equal. That's it. And that's the reason it's the prime manifold. Orden is where law and chaos mix. If you go down, you get more chaos. If you go up, you get more law. Now that's not, there are exceptions. Primordius is up, for instance. It's the world of chaos, but it's not like the source of chaos. There is no source of these things. There are 7 elements in the timescape and two fundamental principles. And the fundamental principles are order and chaos. The thing that makes Orden, the prime manifold, the reason people use that phrase, the prime manifold, which again, keep in mind, there might be as many as 1,000 people in all of Orden who have ever heard that term before, right? But the reason they call it that is because if you do the equation to figure out how much law and how much chaos is there in this manifold, what you get is 0. They balance out. They zero each other out. Everywhere else, you get a value. You get more, there's more law here, there's more chaos there. In Primordius, it's all chaos. In Axiom, it's all law. But here in Orden, they balance each other out, which freaks a lot of other people out. But like most other species, when they end up on Orden, they can feel the fact that there is more law or chaos here than what they are used to, and it freaks them out. The reason Memenek start having emotions. Or I should say it's the reason Memenek lose control over their emotions, which is what actually happens.
Lord Durok, Mockington, JBR, everyone wants to know about the Hawk Lords, and everyone wants to know about the moons, because everyone is asking, are Orden's moons separate manifolds like the sun is a different manifold?
Manifold is just a technical term for world. They mean the same thing. So you look up at the sky and you see this other world, and so when I see people saying, "Is that another manifold?" What I hear is that another world? I'm like, well, of course it is. Like, is the moon another world? Yes, here on Earth, is it another world? Yes, it is. You can see there it is, and we've got a world. We have a world in this solar system that is inhabited exclusively by robots, called Mars. We call it Mars. So I'm sure there are other cultures on Earth that have different names for it, right? And so when people say, "Is that a world?" I'm like, "Of course it is." What do you mean? What do you mean? Is it a world? So I don't know. Yes, all those things are worlds. Can you go to them? Of course you can go to them. Well, you can see it. Why wouldn't you be able to go there? Now, most people can't go there because it takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of energy to get up out of Orden, and 99.99999% of people do not have access to that kind of energy. But some people do, and they can do it. And there are 3 moons that we know of. There are 3 moons that we know of. There's the Dawn Moon, which is has a parent magnitude about as big as our real moon, but it's much smaller and much closer. There's the Dusk Moon, ditto, and the Dawn Moon is a bluish. One of them is a bluish color, and the other one's a reddish color. And then there's the High Moon, I think is what it's called, and the difference between these 3 moons is the Dawn and the Dusk moons are only visible at dawn and dusk. Right. A friend of mine I worked with went and did a bunch of celestial mechanics, hoping that he would find a way that there could be like Keplerian orbits for these things. And he came back and told me that what I was describing was physically impossible. And that brought
Well, it's a good thing you're writing fantasy and not sci-fi.
Well, it was important to me. I didn't want something that was possible. I wanted something that was impossible. And so these moons they look as big as ours do in the sky, which is to say they're really tiny. Right? And then there's the High Moon, which looks as big in the sky as people imagine our moon does. Right? Which means it's fucking huge. If you ask a normal person, and this is a real thing that you can really do, if you ask random people, how big a circle would you have to hold up at arm's length to exactly blot out the moon? About how big would it need to be? And people almost always say the same thing. They say about as big as a Frisbee, about as big as a dinner plate. It's something on that order. And the answer is about as big as a dime, right? At arm's length. You're talking about a circle about that big. People imagine the moon looms large in our imagination. Literally. It literally looms large. People imagine it much bigger than it is. So Orden has 2 moons that have a parent magnitude as the same as the real world moon, which is to say about as big as a dime. And then it has 1 moon, the High Moon, that is visible. It's visible kind of like our moon is. The High Moon is more visible during the day than our moon is, but our moon is also visible during the day. And so the High Moon has phases, the Dawn and Dusk Moon do not. And there's a thing called a turn. Like if you live in Capital, you probably measure time in minutes and hours because that's how you live your life. There are clocks all over the place, and you live your life by the minute. Whereas in most of the rest of Orden, people live their lives at a much slower pace, and they don't have access to clocks unless they have a lot of money, and then that means they're probably in one of the capital cities, which most people aren't. And the shortest period of time that they have in places like Vas Lauria or Vanagar would be either they have a couple. They have the blink of an eye. They have a heartbeat. They have a moment, which is about as long as a heartbeat, and then after that, you get to a turn. And a turn is about 20 minutes. And it's called a turn because it's the time it takes the high moon to spin around once. You can literally sit there and watch this moon spinning, right? And
That's
so
so scary.
any person, I mean, it would be scary to us. It's normal for them. Any person can look up and recognize there's craters on this moon. It's a world like ours. They could look up and they can see which craters are facing them. And they know the next time I see those craters again, 20 minutes has gone by, a third of an hour. And so they have terms like half a turn. Half a turn is 10 minutes. They don't think 10 minutes. They don't translate that into minutes. They don't know what a minute is. They just know that there's this thing turns around about 3 times an hour. So if I need something shorter than a turn, it would be half a turn, a quarter turn, and then you're getting into things like moments and stuff like that. So there's 3 moons, a big one, 2 tiny ones.
Did the Elder Gods create all the original manifolds of the timescape, or just Auden and Arcadia?
I don't think we know the answer to that. I will tell you this. I do think that there are some manifolds that are naturally occurring. And lots of people, like the permanent transient, is in its own manifold. Gnomes can just make manifolds. Did you know that? They can just do that.
I didn't know that, and I don't know how I feel about it.
They make little pocket manifolds that are about as big as my office.
Yeah, that seems on brand for them.
Yeah, but there's like a line of dialogue in the gnome write-up where these 2 shadow elves who are interrogating this gnome they start arguing amongst themselves, and when they turn, the gnome is gone. And one of them is like, we need to follow them. And the other shadow elf is like, what? No, have you ever been to one of their little worldlets? It's like Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. He goes, it's awful. I fucking hate that place. We know that there are created manifolds. I know that there are naturally occurring manifolds. But on a case by case basis, where did this manifold come from? There aren't answers to those questions, and there probably never will be.
There's a lot of stars in that sky. David Penguin is asking about the body banks facilities.
Yeah, the body banks.
Yeah, they say it's said that they originate from the upper worlds. Yeah. Who made them originally? Did Mortem have to modify them to work for humans? And do they accept any type of bodies?
That answer is in the Monsters book. If you look up the write-up for Lord Sewell, I punched him up because I thought he was too cool to just be a named voiceless talker, and I made him a villain the way Korsakef and Sithra on Ronazir, like a campaign-ending villain is. And he invented the body banks. There may have been precursor technologies, but Lord Sewell invented the body banks and then traded them to Mortem because he didn't need them anymore. He had a better idea. He considered them obsolete technology. So it may be that Lord Sewell built a body banks, but his people had the technology before him. What they actually are is a mystery. Unless you've been to certain specific places on the Chrysopolis, which are highly guarded, people don't know. People don't know what the body banks actually are. But what they know is you can make people, and that's where the war dogs come from, but they are also used to grant immortality, kind of like the Lazarus Pit from the Teen Titans. Ooh. They're probably not the same place that the Trilexu Golas come from in the Dune universe. I originally thought they might be, but I've kind of ruled that out. They might be something more like mad scientist glass tubes, which we see like every science fiction movie that needs to make people has science fiction glass tubes. That might be the body banks, but they might just be a giant pit. That might just be a big magic pit that you put bodies into and you get bodies out of.
That's so fun. Very Lazarus Pit. It's also a little bit like the cauldron from Welshmyth that you stick all the bodies in.
Yep, same thing. Or kind of like where they put Han Solo when they froze him in carbonite. It's a big pit. He goes in, something happens, we don't know what, and out comes a Solo popsicle. And what happened down there? We don't know. We don't ever see that. So I want to preserve that. I want to preserve, maybe forever, a little bit of ambiguity about what actually happens down there. I would rather just keep it, the pit and what goes on down there. No one's ever going to know.
Can you stick in bits of goblins or bits of TIE Raiders or bits of whatever and they'd come out and work?
That's the reason. If you look at the war dogs, there were war dogs that have wings. Where did they get those? They just threw some gargoyles in, right?
Have I seen that?
Yeah. Yeah.
That sounds sick as hell.
Yeah. They're in the monster book. I think a lot of players haven't looked at the monster book. There's a lot of lore in the monster book. There's war dogs that have tentacles. You can throw anything. You can throw any organic material into the body banks and you will get crazy nightmare monsters out of it.
The lower world.
We can start with Equinox because Equinox is very, very close to Auden. Equinox is a parasitic manifold. It is a world of eternal twilight. There is never any noon or midnight there. The sun never rises, but it never completely finishes setting. It's a feral jungle world. It's sort of like Jungle Dark Sun. It's an elf world. The dominant species there are the shadow elves. There are still celestials in Equinox. It's just that they're fading out. But fading means they're blurring and smearing away. And they can, under extreme circumstances or emergencies, kind of go and get their shit together and turn back into a regular celestial. But it gets harder and harder, and eventually they'll be gone, and Equinox will evaporate. That might take millennia, but they don't know. And so the shadow elves are kind of freaking out. There are a lot of species that are unique to Equinox. It's where gnomes are from. And if you ask the gnomes, hey, what are you going to do about the fact that your world is dying? They're like, everything dies. What do you mean? What are we going to do about it? We're going down with the ship. Right? There are a lot of species that live in Equinox that think it would be weird to try to stop this process because it's just nature. Things die. What are you going to do? But there's definitely a faction of shadow elves who are like, this is not okay. We need to do something about this.
Herr Krabbe. What are shadow elf naming conventions?
They have their own naming convention. That is a multi-syllabic bunch of nonsense, bullshit, fantasy garbage with an apostrophe in there. And that's specifically because they organize their society along the lines of like great houses. Right? And kind of like Dune, like House Harkonnen, House Atreides. And their individual names are an amalgam of their personal name and their house name. When they announce themselves, they have a multisyllabic name, but if you know their traditions, you know what they're saying is, I am this person of the house of blank. So they have crazy fantasy looking names, but it's usually 3 letters, apostrophe, and then a bunch more and the first 3 letters denote what great house they belong to. The world below is basically our version of the Underdark. It's another manifold. It's a world unto itself. It's a world of caves, some big enough to contain oceans, and it's where the night elves and the astral celestials left and went to after the first war against night. Uniquely, because the world below is also very close to Orden, the equations that describe each of them are very similar, but it's not a parasitic manifold. You can just walk from Orden to the world below. You can just walk there. You don't need a ritual or a spaceship or anything like that. And in fact,
that's how the Greeks got to the underworld.
It's literally the same thing, yeah. Except if you were a sufficiently educated person or had the right experience, you would notice. You're like, something's going on. I think we've moved from one manifold to another, even though most people wouldn't even notice. They'd be like, well, what are you talking about? I just have this sense that we're now in a different world. You can get there by caves. There's also things like just tree hollows sometimes are gateways to the world below. So the notion of bad things are below come from the presence of the world below. And you go south from there or down from there, and you get to the 7 cities of hell, which is very like Terry Gilliam's Brazil, except hell. All about bureaucracy. And I think it's basically also a feudal society. There are literally 7 cities, and each is ruled by a different archdevil. And underneath that is the Abyssal Waste, which is sort of like Mad Max Dark Sun kind of stuff. And in the center of the Abyssal Waste is another place. It's not its own plane, but it does sort of have its own laws called the Necropolitan Ruin. And the Necropolitan Ruin is sort of the bones of every dead empire's capital city. And it's where Korsakef the Infinite lives. He is the sort of the Lord of Death. In fact, I would say probably Korsakef the Infinite is the closest we have to an Orcus analog, where he is the king of the dead, and he rules a court of the dead in a city of the dead. The Abyssal Waste is incredibly low energy. The native denizens of the Abyssal Waste are demons, and demons are like random. They don't have a shape or form. They just, self-assemble into just bags of eyeballs and teeth and tentacles and stuff. And the currency used in these lower worlds is souls. There's like an investment organization. There's like a NASDAQ or a stock exchange in the 7 cities of hell where they trade in souls. But the demons of the Abyssal Waste are also very interested in souls. They eat them, and the more souls they eat, the more they gain an identity and a personality. And once that happens, they do not want to lose those souls, because that would mean losing their identity. In fact, there was a great war that Relg lost. There have been a couple of them, the Memory Wars, and they're about demons who don't want to lose their identity. And so the demons who have accumulated enough souls are constantly trying to get out of the abyss, because if they lose their souls, they fall into a state called Lethe, Lethe. And they don't want that. But if they can get out of the abyss, then they can't fall into Lethe. And so they're always trying to get out. And the annoying thing is the only way out is through hell. So the only demons and devils are completely unrelated species, unrelated phenomenon. It's just that devils tend to know a lot about demons because they're kind of like cockroaches. They're all over the place. It's like you always have to worry about demons showing up, and they don't care about the 7 cities. It's just the nearest plane on the way out.
Well, thank you so much for going through all of this lore with us. Thank you everyone for all the questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of them. We didn't even get to all of the ones that were in my document, let alone all the ones that were on the Patreon. There were so many
another
questions.
one of these later this year or next year.
Hell yeah. Have a good have a good, and we'll see you on a later one of these. That was a really good outro.
It's terrible when bad things happen to good sentences. Thanks for watching, everybody. Thanks for watching.